Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Well, of course, Sri, your co-host, and unable to join me today is Peter. When he's not co-hosting this podcast, he serves as partnership acceleration lead at Flywheel, a division of Omnicom that helps enterprise brands improve their SEO and SEM, growing their e-commerce businesses. And today, he's proud to be celebrating the graduation of his wife, and that's why he's not here with us. Please do listen to my older daughter, Ria Raj's music at www.riaraj.com. That's R-H-E-R-A-J. Follow my younger daughter, Laura Raj, as a member of the Geffen Records Universal Music Group Cat's Eye. While my wife, Kavita Raj, has her own podcast, Lights, Camera, Convo, already picked up by iHeartRadio and all streaming platforms. In June, the entire family, all four of us, will have our own podcast or a radio channel. Before we get to our guest, we want to ask you to help spread the word about this community we've created in the CPG Guys. Beyond sharing our podcast with your friends, if you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify as your preferred learning platform, leave us a rating, as it helps feed the algorithm that makes us more findable by CPG retail people like you looking for education and entertainment. But more importantly, it also tells us whether we have the right guests and we're having the right conversations. We're happy that CPG Guys is part of an impressive collection of highly rated podcasts, including the CPG Guys Fast Forward, hosted by Brian Gildenberg, CPG Scoop with Risa and Jennifer, and across the pond called The Atlantic, the FMCG Guys with Daniel Ifrain and Christine over in Western Europe. And finally, we're incredibly proud of our allyship with Next Up, with Lisa Baird, whose mission is to advance the cause of women in business and to promote gender equality in the workplace. Next Up has terrific educational networking resources available to its members. I serve on the board of directors leading the development committee at Next Up. I encourage all of you to check out www.nextupisnow.org. Links to our podcast, our sistercast, our landing page on Next Up, and social media profiles of my daughters Ria and Laura, my wife's podcast, can be found in the digital liner notes of this episode. So it's time. We're joined today by none other than Julie Bowerman, CMO of the recently formed Kellanova from the split of the Kellogg Company. We're joined today by Julie Bowerman, CMO of the recently formed Kellanova from the split of the Kellogg Company. Kellanova, of course, is the snacks division, and I've been eagerly looking forward to hosting on the CPG Guys. In the spirit of disclosure, as former CCO of General Mills, we waited for me to be in this full-time role to engage in this dialogue. So I'm very excited to hit up for the first time an important anchor category in Center Store, as well as one that's usually always on the end caps and in the lobby as well and in Impulse. None other than this huge category for brand building, snacks. So Julie herself comes with a solid brand building background and e-commerce digital experience, including shopper and digital marketing experiences with brands in her past such as none other than the giant Coca-Cola, Heinz Celestial Company, Kellogg's, of course, and Bridges Healthcare. I look forward to a robust brand building discussion in today's omnichannel retail and digital marketing and experience-oriented consumer. Julie, welcome to the CPG Guys.
Wow, thank you, Sri. I hope I live up to that nice, generous introduction.
This is going to be fun. So before we get started with our Q&A part of the segment here, can you give us a quick overview of your current role and remit as the CMO for Kellanova?
Yeah, for sure. So pleasure to be here. I, like you, have been aspiring for some time to join the podcast. I've admired from afar and listened to many of your episodes and heard many of my peers on here. So I'm thrilled to join today. Thanks for inviting me. So I am the CMO of Kellanova North America. My remit spans across kind of all things marketing. It's the steward of our great global iconic brands, which I'll talk about here in a second, and the capability design of the way in which we go to market. Broadly, that's media, creative, digital, data, design. So all of those things that create the experience around our brands. For your listeners that are maybe new to the Kellanova name, Kellanova is a fairly new formed company as kind of the end of last year. We were previously known as Kellogg, the Kellogg Company. And in October last year, we spun off our U.S. cereal business and we became a standalone global snacking powerhouse. And we have the most amazing portfolio of brands: Pop-Tarts, Eggo, Cheez-It, Pringles, Rice Krispie Treats, RX Bar, Morningstar Farms, Club Crackers. I mean, the list goes on. So it's a privilege to be a part of that portfolio.
Julie, thank you so much for that overview. Yes, indeed. And I've been looking forward to having this discussion with you. I, of course, come from a snacking community back from my Frito-Lay days and then over at General Mills too, at least in the Nature Valley segment and Gardettos and Chex Mix. So in the digital liner notes of this episode, we'll include links to your LinkedIn profile and Kellanova's company corporate websites for our listeners to access while we go on with our conversation. So if you're ready, Julie, here's my first one. Our audience and I would love to hear your career journey all the way back from media planning back in 1997 at the Coca-Cola Company to your ascent as CMO of Kellanova. Dream job, one would argue. What experiences do you think you learned over the years that are actually playing out now and have put you in this role as a CMO? And then what advice would you give other young aspirants, brand stewards coming out of MBA school who wish to follow in your footsteps and be a CMO themselves someday?
Thanks for the question. So yeah, my journey has been almost 25 plus years now, maybe even more to be honest, but 25 plus years, we'll leave it at that. A good bit of that time was at the Coca-Cola Company, as you mentioned, and that's really where I built my foundation in marketing. I was coming out of grad school in Michigan, and that's kind of an important part of my story on how I got to Kellanova. Coming out of grad school, I wanted to get south. I had done a case study around Diet Coke, and I wanted to go work for the Coca-Cola Company. And so I came to Atlanta, and my journey through a small stop at an agency got me to Coke. And I did a lot of different marketing jobs there, brand, promotions, media, digital, really got a lot of breadth in marketing, but I also had some experience in sales and commercial strategy. And so I just got a really good foundation early on. And then my career pivoted to digital while I was at Coke. You know, at the time that digital was an emerging capability, believe it or not, in CPG. I started the first loyalty program called My Coke Rewards and was a part of that for many years. I then went into e-commerce when Amazon was knocking on our door, and we could never imagine a day that 12 packs would be sold online at the time. And here we are many years later. Of course, they're selling many 12 packs online, but I started and built that business model inside the Coca-Cola Company. And then I had the privilege of moving into an international role and spent about 3 years at Coke in an international role, traveling the world, working across, all types of developing, emerging markets, learning retail landscapes, consumer preferences, our portfolio choices. It was just an amazing experience to work around the world and something I think foundational to who I became as a leader and my experience that crafted my leadership style. Working internationally created a lot of sense of kind of seek to understand, curiosity, not all things are the same, external in. All of those kind of skills I grew from being an international. And then I decided that it was time for me to leave Coke. I loved the company. It was a great experience, but it was not the only place I wanted to work. And I wanted more experience, more breadth. And I went to Hain Celestial, which is in the natural organic category, and was there for a couple of years until the Kellogg Company came knocking. And I knew Steve, the CEO, from our days together at Coke, and knew what a great leader he was. And he was relatively new to Kellogg as well, and coming in to kind of return the company to growth and transform the business, as you clearly see he's done over his term as there. And I knew, one of my learnings in my career is follow good leaders. And so that took me to Kellogg, starting off as a Chief Digital and Experience Officer globally. And then after about 3 years of that, I went into this CMO role, and it's been my dream job to be a CMO. I never thought I could be a CMO of such a company like Kellanova with the brands that we have. But I feel incredibly fortunate to be in the position that I am. I think you asked me too about what lessons I have picked up along the way. I think the one I shared with follow good leaders. Sometimes that's more important than the job itself, because the growth you get from following good leaders is really critical. The other thing I'd say, I talked a little bit about this in my Coke experience. I was fortunate to work at a big CPG pretty close to out of school. And that gave me kind of a lot of breadth. And so I did a lot of different jobs very early in my career because a big company like Coke and Kellanova have a breadth of jobs to go into and really build skills. And so that to me was foundational to kind of what happened later in my career. Because I had that breadth, it became easier for me to grow later on because of those foundational skills. And it ties kind of to my last little tip is, be careful about chasing titles and climbing the ladder too quickly. I've always been an ambitious and achievement oriented person. And I made mistakes at times, just to chase and look for, I wanted a director title or I wanted a VP title. And I got a little, I think too focused on title at a couple points in my career versus continuing to develop experiences. And so, I'd say those are my career tips.
Two big ones there, Julie. The first one is follow good leaders. That's how I ended up at General Mills. I talked to this gentleman, John Nudi, for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes midway through the interview, I said to myself, this is a guy I want to follow. I want to work for, and it worked out. And he's the one I worked for 3 years. He was North America president there, which was fabulous because I learned quite a bit how to manage a P&L, running a very large scale team in sales, etc. from him. And then the other one on the title one you refer to, I often tell people, hey, take laterals. Laterals get you cross-functional, broad exposure and experience. Not everything has to be 100 miles deep. Sometimes it can be 100 miles wide. So those are two wonderful pieces of advice, especially to young people who make plans. Hey, by 40, I want to be EVP, things of that nature. And in the last 3 years, especially over COVID, I've heard a lot of people tell me that. I'm sure you hear that all the time too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So your background, Julie, obviously comes with e-commerce expertise. You just mentioned starting up Amazon on day one, kind of, I remember doing that for Frito and trying to sell the 32 pack versus a 9.5 ounce bag on Amazon back then.
Sri, we were doing all of this at the same time. And we were just at competitive companies. And so we never really got to connect much, but I certainly knew of you.
It was called Day One, right? Amazon's building was called Day One. And I think we must have both worked with David Nenke at that point, the Australian guy.
Yeah, definitely.
And if I think about the last 4 years, right, others have played catch up with what you and I had a chance to learn 10 years ago. And you and I got lucky, whatever it might be, we took the right role. But catch up has certainly happened in the last 4 years. And the truth about the situation, if you walk into a Walmart now, and I did a lot of store walks last 3 years as part of the job. And if you walk into a Walmart now and you just observe who's shopping, 80% of people touching the aisles and actually pulling product from a shelf, they have a phone in their hand. They could be a picker for Instacart. They could be a picker for Walmart, click and collect. But lo and behold, that's not 80% of the population. The majority of Walmart actual customers are doing something with their phone when they're in the aisle. They're either price shopping, they're using a list to shop, they're looking at the Ibotta offer for the week, whatever the case might be. So the question I have for you is, in a world now which is really omni-channel and heavily digitally led, how have you personally adapted to this situation in your new role here as the CMO? Like, are you talking about a digital marketing mix? And then how are you bringing people along the way? Because often the 30-year veterans in brick and mortar, it's not that they don't want to change, they haven't been given the right training.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the last 4 years has been the dramatic shift. You're right. It's been a catch up for sure and kind of accelerated the behaviors as a result of COVID. And it's probably the single largest thing that's just impacted marketing and frankly, probably just our business overall, our commercial business overall. Here's what I would tell you, fundamentally, you have to be iterative and agile because it's constantly evolving and changing. And so, even just for example, an organization structure, how we structured 5 years ago, 4 years ago, in the COVID or pre-COVID environment is not how we're structured today. We're shaping that continuously and trying new things. We're bringing in new talent skills. The skill, I tell my team all the time, I'm like, if you have omni or e-commerce in your title, you're golden. It's such a sought after experience. And so we're constantly kind of refreshing and bringing in talent with those types of skills. I'd say the biggest thing, though, related to omni-channel that I'm focused on today and that we're focused on in kind of our capability set and how we go to market is the use of data. Because what happened is all of this digital shopping throws off immense amount of data about our shopping behaviors, and our retailers who already had data sophistication have gotten even better because they've stood up media networks. And so that kind of combination of change that has happened, like we have to be data people, like as marketers, we have to have the data skills, we have to have the data access, we have to know to use that data to find the right audiences, to solve the brand problems, to partner with our retailers. And like, just that is a very new skill set. And so we're putting a lot of focus in terms of that sophistication, just the capability itself, but then the training of our organization to do it. And we're doing a lot of testing and learning. Like we're working a lot with a couple of the major retailer media networks who are more advanced. And we're really looking at, kind of those models as a way to do full funnel. They've got the data to give you the intelligence on your audience and behaviors and the measurement tools, but they've now got crazy reach. They've partnered with streaming services and networks outside of their ecosystem that allow you to kind of go from top of funnel to the bottom of the funnel. So we're learning a lot there in that space as well.
So Julie, you kind of went where I was going to go next. So let's jump right into it. One of the niches of the CPG guys, you guessed it, retail media. So
Yeah.
I can't talk to a CMO and not hit this topic. So while I want to ask you how you're approaching retail media, you kind of got into it a little bit. Let's talk about the real elephant in the room. Over the last 4 years, retail media budgets went from did not exist or nascent or tiny to large numbers, maybe 100x, or maybe 50x what people were investing 5 years ago. That's a change in the marketing mix completely. It's a change in agency relationships. It's a change in talent. So how are you approaching retail media overall? And then all of a sudden now as business slowed down from a volume perspective, especially for food, snacks included, and retail media budgets are starting to slow down. Retailers don't like that. So how are you approaching this new paradigm shift in retail media? Is everyone ready to follow you in the company? Do marketers understand that retail media is non-negotiable? And then what you just explained, rather than focus on lower funnel, which is what it was last 3 years, how does retail media become full funnel? And for that, media network providers also have to have offsite capabilities. So how are you guys playing catch up there? What are you asking of retailers? And how are you pulling it into the MMM?
Yeah, I would say we don't kind of have all the answers, but I can share with you a perspective and how we're starting to approach it. So I'd say there's kind of two things, and I alluded to one earlier, is like we are looking at probably even 2-3 years ago, I'd say retailer media networks were mostly lower funnel and mostly a commitment based on the relationship we had with a customer. The kind of fast forward of that of where we are today is there's real merit, I think, in these platforms. Not all of them, but in a good bit of them, there's real merit in the platforms in terms of the network's reach that they have, and then backed by that data capability that I just talked about. So I believe that, if full funnel is your ambition, which is one of our fundamentals of kind of our marketing capability and where we're shifting our model, then retailer media networks are likely a good source for that. And so like I mentioned, we're doing some testing there with a couple of our brands just to prove that out. But in that scenario, let's give you an example. Like if a brand has a job to be done of recruitment, which most brands have recruitment, right? You can go to a retailer media network and say, who hasn't bought before? But who's buying maybe other brands in the snacking category? Or who's shopping for these types of occasions where our brands are most appropriate? So you get the kind of clarity on an audience target. You then can put media to get reach, so you can reach the breadth of them across their networks, but their capability allows you to keep continuing to pull them all the way down into the basket. So you're able to really understand in kind of a pretty easy way, like how your return on investment is working against the problem you're trying to solve of the brand. versus just a reach goal or right. It's really able to say kind of across this problem of the brand, did we solve it? Did we recruit? And so I like that as a model for us to really start to test and learn and potentially scale across. So that's one. And then on the flip side, it's also one of the things we're building. And we recently made some organization changes around Omni, where we are putting it closer and closer to the account team's responsibility to own the online business. And the reason we're doing that is because we've got to look holistically at our investment at a customer, across trade, across media, and say, how do we, one, plan that jointly? How do we make sure we prioritize the most important investments that are driving the most value for the customer and us? But also, how do we make sure that we're using both of those investments to drive the business? Because as you were saying, consumers are walking in stores with their device and buying in store, but using digital. And so your digital advertising investment will drive in store as well. And so we've really kind of driven more accountability at the sales team level to think about that pool of investment holistically. And I say those are the two things that we're doing today.
So Julie, just so I understand well, so prior to you had one central e-commerce team, and as part of moving to this full funnel, you kind of split that up into, hey, let the Walmart team have the e-commerce people for Walmart, kind of have that relationship with Walmart connect as opposed to one, and that would apply through the course of all channels rather than have one central team own everything, right?
Yeah. And that's a recent change. And I think that, when you and I started off in e-com CPG, it wasn't appropriate to do that because it was such a small business. We didn't know anything. It was better to centralize it and just learn, drive, build capabilities. But we've reached the scale. It's 15% of our business right now, and some customers even more than that. And so it's too big of a business for an account lead not to think about that in a holistic way. So that's why it was ready to make the change in terms of structure.
No debate, Julie. That's the exact same thing I did at General Mills when I got there 3 years ago. Moved it to the account team so that they can have end-to-end ownership. Plus, for a handful of customers, merchants became omni-channel as well, and it didn't feel right to have a person sitting in headquarters come in and have that conversation as opposed to the account team. I have one more question for you on the retail media world, which is nowadays it feels like every retailer has a retail media network, no matter how big or small they are or what kind of audience they have, right? They built it around the store. But media, there's a pecking order even in media, and the larger the audience, the more serious you get. How are you thinking in terms of those budgets, right? Because you can't vanilla spread those media dollars across 30 different retailers. That makes no sense at all. Are you picking and choosing the top 5? Because at the end of the day, as a CMO, your primary role, as you said, is acquisition.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer to that question is I wouldn't say we're just only picking the top 5. I mean, we're
I made a number up, top 7.
Yeah, we're disproportionately spending to where the value, right, is most delivered. So for sure on that. But there's a couple of, I'd say, retailer media networks that have built some sophisticated capabilities that, might not be as big as others, but they've got some interesting capabilities. And so we're trying to kind of balance the agility to learn in those kind of environments with okay, this is too big of an opportunity for us not to put a bulk of investment there. And so we're doing a little bit of both, or we're doing both, I should say.
No debate at all, Julie, whatsoever. And so now let's jump to the shopper. We kind of both consented the shopper is now close to being 100% digitally influenced. So have you invested in prioritizing the digital shopper journey or an omni-channel journey for that matter? Are you looking at that for innovation effectiveness? And then how does consumer insights inform your innovation development and portfolio as a result?
Yeah, you mean, are we using digital shopping as an insight driver to innovation? Yes. Again, I think this is a space we're learning. And I think that's absolutely the destination and it's part of our ambition, but it's not all the way maybe where, you've just articulated. We've got some direct to consumer initiatives ourselves that we're using as ways to launch innovation, but also to watch behavior. And we kind of feed that behavior in terms of performance back into, our brand insights gathering or some of our innovation development for sure. But that's a space I'd say, in a world of priorities is one that we're kind of dabbling in, but not wholesale shifting.
Awesome. I guessed as much that would be the case. And then have you all invested in creating the new shopper journey that's truly omni-channel as opposed to a digital or a brick and mortar?
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of our model of full funnel that, we're looking at behaviors across. And so, whatever, again, kind of back to the jobs to be done of the brand, if based on the job to be done, if consideration is the most important, part of the funnel to drive that job, then we're looking at kind of those touch points with consumers that would best appropriate both in a physical and a digital context and bringing those two together. So yeah, I mean, there's really not much we're doing anymore that's standalone physical or standalone digital. We're really, I'd say, very much wired omni.
And Julie, so I want to go back to omnichannel and go to a slightly uncomfortable place, which is household penetration. All food brands, or majority of food brands, I shouldn't say all, over the course of the last year, due to the inflation-related private label, etc., have lost household penetration. Is retail media or digital an opportunity to get household penetration back versus brick and mortar, or is that just my naive thinking?
First of all, fundamentally, like brick and mortar, like they're still with 80% or more of our business there, like the basic fundamentals of just on-shelf execution, TDP gains, good price pack architecture. Like fundamentally, that is where, I mean, it's core to our strategy. Like it's core to what we're focused on right now. And that's very much in the physical context. But in the digital context, yeah, I mean, the great thing about the digital context is it gives us a place that we can figure that out quicker. Because we can see performance quicker and behavior quicker. And so we can kind of know what's happening. And so it allows us to kind of use both, but in different ways a little bit. Does that answer your question?
It very much does. So let me remind our audience, I'm speaking to Julie Bowerman, CMO of Kellanova. So Julie, as a CMO of a snacks category brand, which arguably over COVID has gotten wider and bigger in household pantries, expandable consumption became real over COVID. So you're now working in an ecosystem which is the category is actually expanded. So where do you see the greatest opportunities for growth and innovation for Kellanova?
Well, we still have a lot of great, I mean, our brands, as large as they are and as scales and as iconic as they are, there's still a lot of, opportunity and growth of those brands as well. But there's adjacencies to those categories also in snacking segments that are developing in ways that weren't in existence before. Flavors, for example, is a tremendous expansion of snacking. And you've probably seen some of the growth or some of the work that we've done in terms of just our flavors that we offer and with Pringles or Cheez-It, Pop-Tarts. I mean, we've just really expanded that offering, which has been a major opportunity for us. And then the other place of that is in channels and thinking about channels in ways that we haven't otherwise for our brands, kind of more on the go occasions, out of home occasions now that, we're in a post-COVID environment. So we're looking at channels of opportunity related to those occasions also.
Fabulous. Social media. You knew it was coming. In a world now where we have examples in the recent past within the last year of one unintended post or one unintended brand action can cause absolute chaos, not just to a brand, but to an entire category. How do you approach brand building and maintain a positive brand reputation in such a social media-led environment today?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. And we've had to, at times, make tough choices, to preserve the safety of our brands and do the right thing by our consumers at the expense of, maybe a return or a immediate return on our business. So we take brand safety and our social responsibility very seriously in environments that are, not following the values of the company. And so it's important to us. We have a pretty robust and rigorous process around monitoring that safety of our brands across, whatever platform we're advertising or marketing on.
So do you all actually do like a control tower where you're continuously looking at what's out there from a reputation perspective and then taking action as required? The reason I asked that is today's world, if you don't take a stand, somebody is unhappy. If you take a stand, somebody's unhappy. As a CMO, that cannot be fun.
It's a delicate balance, that we walk that line carefully. And I'd say there's a wide variety of situations where we pose that question to ourselves, and not all of them are created equal or the same. And sometimes we speak out and sometimes we don't. And it's just, I think what we always go back to is kind of the central kind of values of us as a company that is founded on inclusivity and diversity. And kind of, the right thing by our giving back to our consumers. Those values, I think, drive us on how we do decision making when those incidences come up. And when you do that, it kind of makes the decision pretty easy.
And Julie, up top, you mentioned that you have a small D2C business. You're probably using it for experimenting and things of the collecting data, things of that nature. But do you actually invest in the influencer world in that case in your marketing mix, both for the brick and mortar world as well as the D2C world?
Yeah, both. We've done definitely, I wouldn't say that influencer is core to our marketing strategy, but absolutely, we use influencers in a way that kind of help get, more eyeballs or attention or explain an innovation, because it's uniquely part of that partnership. But I think we've done some interesting things as an influencer ourselves. I mean, you've probably seen our frosted strawberry Pop-Tart character. Arguably, frosted strawberry is becoming an influencer in and of itself. And so we use, some of the great content that we can deliver off of our brands also, versus always just partnering with influencers. But it's a part of our strategy for sure.
So Julie, here's the price question. Should the CPG guys become influencers or Kellanova? I'm just kidding.
Well, you already are right here.
Here we go. We just publicly, jointly created this podcast to do just that, right? Let's talk about teamwork, because no successful leader, especially senior leader, can do so without a strong team, right? So often there are statements made that a good leader surrounds themselves with people who are smarter than them so that they can learn and also can get the job done. So what characteristics do you look for in team members and leaders that can work with you collaboratively to, at the end of the day, develop brand Kellanova? And then for other leaders listening into this podcast, what advice would you leave for them?
Yeah, I learned probably in the hard way years ago in my career of as a leader, I think checking the ego at the door. And you don't need to have every single answer. You don't need to always be the expert. But if you bring a diverse team with diverse skill sets and diverse thinking around you, that collectively drives the right outcomes. And you kind of let, again, the ego at the door because you're doing the right thing holistically as a team that creates the right team environment. So I appreciate, to build up what you said, not necessarily people that are smarter than me. It's not about just plain smarts, I should say. It's more around complementary skills, things that will round us out as a team and have expertise or diverse thinking that I don't have. And so that becomes kind of really important for me in terms of, and then, from a leadership style, I think it's all around empowerment of the individual, setting really clear goals. I'm kind of pretty goal focused and really clear on kind of here's what our priorities are, and then helping you do that. And you're empowered to run, whatever your remit is given or wherever you fall in those priorities, own it, run it, be scrappy, figure it out. I'll be there to help you knock down barriers that are preventing it. But yet I don't need, check-ins every week or be copied on every email. You're the decision maker, you're the expert, go for it. And so I think that's kind of part of my style of leadership, empowering others for sure.
And then what advice would you give to other leaders listening in? Any one thing that stands out in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's got to be the balance of that impact, your business prioritization with empathy. And outside of, kind of the empowerment, I really drive a personal connection with my individual team members. So I know who they are, not just in the 8 to 5, but in the, kind of full life. So I can get to know them, who they are, what matters to them, and help them, keep a balance and keep that in perspective of them as an individual and as a talent. And I think like that's a really important part of leadership, more so now than ever. I mean, employees want flexibility, they want hybrid environments, they want to work from home, all of those things. And so that talent pool is very different than the one that you and I grew up in. And so getting a sense of who they are holistically and what's motivating them, I think is really, really important part of leadership today and building trust with talent.
No debate, Julie, because most leaders that come here will tell me the same thing, right? The number one thing they look at is the EQ quotient that actually really results in empathy to understand, walk a mile in someone else's shoe. So the last question we have in the CPG Guys is something we call fast forward, where we ask you to take a crystal ball. I'm kidding, not a crystal ball, but what emerging trends do you believe will have the biggest impact on market? Retail media is clearly one of them, but it's already at our lap. But are there other emerging trends you're looking at, like AI? Is there something else out there which will have a big impact on marketing in the near future? And then how do you adapt to make sure you know what the latest trends are? And so do your teams.
I do think it's this concept of automation. Like, I think it's going to become less and less in our control as marketers, and technology, just the fragmentation of media. Like, your brand message is in so many places. And, as that continues, that's going to continue to grow. And then, at the point on influencers, right? Influencers a lot of times control the brand message. And so as marketers, again, I grew up in the world of like, we created a great 30-second ad and you've kind of done your job as a marketer. Now, like, it's more out of your hands and out of your control directly. And so that whole idea of like automation and how things are going to just happen more seamlessly, like, how do you operate in that environment, right? How do you kind of not only, make sure your just brand safety is, most fundamental, but like relevance, engagement, breakthrough, all of those things are going to be kind of directly, I think, less and less in the hands of marketers. And so having the data knowledge, the technology, like the skill sets of talent that can help figure out how to still be effective in that environment, I think is going to be critical.
Let me remind our audience that you can find all of our content by simply going to a web browser and typing cpgguys.com as a URL. If you think you or your company has some thought leadership to contribute, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. Again, that's contact@cpgguys.com. And maybe you can join us on this podcast just like Julie did and share your leadership views as well. Drop us a rating at cpgguys.com in the navigation bar up top. Sincerely, from the bottom of Peter and my heart, thank you for the 31,000 plus followers on LinkedIn. We know that's the equivalent of millions on Instagram, given LinkedIn the platform. Without you, the show wouldn't exist. Thank you for the DMs, the clicks, the likes, the comments. You shape the show. You tell us who to bring on, what topics to have. And again, thank you from the bottom of our heart. Julie, thank you for making time on a Friday afternoon to be with us on the podcast.
Of course, my pleasure. Nice to spend time with you for sure.
Folks, that's the wrap of this episode. We will see you soon on another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.